When the Great Depression hit, dinner didn't come from a store. It came from whatever was left in the cupboard, and 15 minutes of nerve. Your grandmother could turn a nickel's worth of flour into a supper that filled 4 bellies, and she could do it before the coffee went cold. These weren't recipes. They were survival. 25 suppers born from hard times, ration books, and empty pockets. Meals so cheap and so fast that families kept making them long after the money came back. Number 13 fed an entire army across the Pacific. Number 5 kept whole coal towns alive through the winter. And number 1, grown men still ask for it by a nickname too salty to say at the dinner table. Let's count down the 25 cheapest 15-minute suppers America's seniors made when there was nothing left but grit. Number 25, the onion sandwich. When the pantry was down to almost nothing, there was still bread and there was still an onion. Grandma would slice a sweet onion paper thin, lay it between 2 pieces of soft white bread, add a smear of butter if there was any, and a good shake of salt, and call it supper. It cost pennies. An onion went for a few cents and stretched across a week. The bite was sharp enough to wake you up, the bread soft enough to go down easy. Some families rubbed the bread with bacon grease for a whisper of meat that wasn't there. Children learned not to complain, because complaining didn't fill a plate. It was humble to the point of embarrassment, but it was warm, it was filling, and it kept the family fed until payday came around again. Number 24, milk toast. On the leanest nights and the sickest mornings, milk toast was mercy in a bowl. Grandma toasted a slice of bread, buttered it while it was hot, then floated it in a bowl of warm milk sweetened with a spoonful of sugar and a dusting of cinnamon if the tin wasn't empty. That was the whole supper. A cup of milk cost next to nothing, and a single slice of bread turned it into something that felt like comfort instead of hunger. The toast went soft at the edges and stayed crisp in the middle, soaking up the sweet, warm milk. It was the meal mothers made when a child was feverish, when the paycheck was gone, when there was simply nothing else. Plain as it was, generations remember it as the taste of being cared for. Number 23, peanut butter bread. Peanut butter was the miracle of the hard years. Cheap, filling, and packed with the protein meat couldn't provide. When there was no meat and no money, Grandma spread it thick on bread, but the real trick was baking it right in. She stirred peanut butter into a simple flour, sugar, and milk batter, and baked a dense, nutty loaf that sliced like cake and cost almost nothing. A jar of peanut butter stretched for weeks, and a loaf of this bread could carry a lunch pail all week long. Warm from the oven, it filled the kitchen with a roasted, homey smell that made an empty cupboard feel less empty. Children ate it plain or with a scrape of jelly on holidays. It was proof that a nickel's worth of pantry staples could still taste like something a family looked forward to. Number 22, poor man's tomato soup. Long before soup came in a red and white can everyone could afford, families made their own from almost nothing. Grandma warmed a can of tomatoes, or even a squirt of ketchup thinned with hot water, stirred in a splash of milk and a pat of butter, and cracked black pepper over the top. Poured over crumbled saltine crackers, it swelled into a supper that stuck to the ribs. A can of tomatoes cost a dime and fed the whole table. The crackers did the heavy lifting, softening into the warm broth until the bowl was thick and filling. Some mothers added a pinch of baking soda so the milk wouldn't curdle against the acid, a trick passed hand to hand across back fences. It was fast, it was hot, and on a cold night it felt like far more than the few cents it took to make. Number 21, fried cornmeal mush. Cornmeal was the backbone of the poor kitchen, and mush was its most honest form. Grandma boiled cornmeal with water and salt into a thick porridge, poured it into a loaf pan, and let it set overnight in the cold pantry. Come morning or supper, she sliced it and fried the pieces in a little grease until the edges turned golden and crisp. Drizzled with syrup or molasses, it was breakfast. Smothered in gravy, it was dinner. A bag of cornmeal cost a few cents a pound and could feed a family for days. The frying was the magic. Crunchy on the outside, soft and creamy within. It stretched the humblest grain into 2 meals from one pot. Poor as it was, the smell of mush frying in a hot skillet meant nobody in that house was going to bed hungry. Number 20. Baked beans on toast. When a can of pork and beans cost a nickel, it became the fastest hot supper in America. Grandma warmed the beans in a saucepan, toasted a couple slices of bread, and spooned the beans right over the top while the toast was still crisp. In 5 minutes, a hungry family had a plate that was sweet, smoky, and filling. The molasses in the beans tasted almost like a treat, and the bread caught every drop of the thick sauce. A single can stretched to feed the table with bread, doing the rest. Some families cracked an egg on top or scattered a little cheese if the icebox allowed. It asked nothing of the cook and gave back a warm, honest meal. For working families counting every cent, beans on toast was proof that supper didn't need to be complicated to be good. Number 19. Hot water cornbread. Some nights there wasn't enough for a proper pan of cornbread, so Grandma made hoe cakes instead. She stirred cornmeal, salt, and boiling water into a stiff batter, shaped it into flat little cakes with her hands, and fried them in a hot, greased skillet until they were crisp and golden on both sides. It took cornmeal, water, and a few minutes, nothing more. The outside crackled, the inside stayed soft and steamy. Split hot and buttered, or crumbled into a bowl of beans, hot water cornbread turned the cheapest grain in the pantry into something that felt like a meal. The name came from the fields, where cooks once baked the batter on a hoe over the fire. In hard times, it fed the family for pennies, hot off the stove, and there was rarely a crumb left on the plate. Number 18. Wilted lettuce salad. In spring and summer, the garden gave what money couldn't. Grandma picked a bowl of tender leaf lettuce and green onions, then fried up a strip or two of bacon, or just heated the saved drippings. She poured the hot grease straight over the greens with a splash of vinegar and a pinch of sugar, and the leaves collapsed with a hiss into a warm, tangy salad. A few cents of bacon flavored a whole bowl, and the lettuce came free from the backyard. Crumbled bacon on top, if there was any to spare, made it feel like a feast. Served with cornbread, it was a whole light supper on a warm evening. The sizzle of hot fat hitting cool leaves was the sound of summer in a poor kitchen, resourceful, quick, and built entirely from what was already on hand. Number 17. EGG gravy and biscuits. When even sausage was a luxury, Grandma made gravy from an egg. She whisked an egg into flour and a little grease in the skillet, then poured in milk and stirred until it thickened into a rich, speckled gravy. Ladled over hot biscuits, it turned a few pantry basics into a filling, satisfying supper. An egg, a spoon of flour, and a cup of milk cost almost nothing, yet it fed the whole table warm and hearty. The egg gave the gravy body and a golden richness that plain flour gravy never had. Children mopped their plates clean with the last of the biscuit. It was the meal that stretched a single egg into dinner for a family. Clever, quick, and comforting. In poor kitchens across the country, egg gravy proved that flavor and fullness could be conjured from almost nothing. Number 16. Salmon patties. A can of pink salmon was one of the great bargains of the lean years, and Grandma knew how to stretch it. She flaked the salmon, bones and all, for they mashed right in and nobody minded. Mixed it with a beaten egg and a handful of crushed crackers or cornmeal. Shaped it into patties and fried them crisp in a hot skillet. In 15 minutes, a 15-cent can became golden cakes that fed the whole family. The outsides crackled, while the insides stayed moist and savory. Served with a squeeze of lemon or a smear of ketchup and a side of beans, it was Friday supper in countless homes. The crackers stretched the fish so one can feed 4 or 5. Salmon patties gave working families the taste of something special, a little bit of the sea for the price of pocket change. Number 15, cabbage and noodles. Passed down from immigrant grandmothers, this dish turned 2 of the cheapest things in the store into a supper that filled every plate. Grandma fried a head of shredded cabbage and a sliced onion in butter until soft and golden at the edges, then folded in a pot of boiled egg noodles with plenty of salt and pepper. A head of cabbage cost a nickel and could feed a crowd. The cabbage went sweet and silky in the pan. The noodles soaked up the buttery flavor, and the whole skillet smelled rich enough to draw the family to the table before it was even done. Some added a bit of bacon or leftover meat, but it needed nothing. Hot, buttery, and filling cabbage and noodles was the kind of humble supper that fed hard-working families through long winters on almost nothing at all. Number 14, fried bologna sandwiches. There was a reason bologna earned the nickname the poor man's steak. A thick slice fried in a hot skillet, curled up at the edges into a little bowl, and browned into something far better than the cold cut it started as. Grandma slid it onto soft white bread with a swipe of mustard or mayonnaise, and just like that, supper was ready in 5 minutes. A ring of bologna cost pennies and fed everyone. The frying was the whole trick. It crisped the edges, deepened the flavor, and made the humblest lunch meat taste almost like a real fried steak. Kids came running when they heard it sizzle. Cheap, fast, and endlessly satisfying, the fried bologna sandwich became a staple in working homes across America, and plenty of those kids grew into seniors who still fry a slice when they want to taste their childhood. Number 13, fried Spam. When war rationing put fresh meat out of reach, a can of Spam kept dinner on the table. Grandma sliced it thick, fried it in a dry skillet until the edges caramelized and crisped, and served it with rice, eggs, or between 2 slices of bread. It fed an entire army across the Pacific and just as many families back home. A can cost little, never spoiled, and needed no icebox, perfect for households with neither money nor refrigeration. Fried right, it turned salty and crisp with a sweet browned crust that made it far more than emergency food. Some families glazed it with a little syrup or mustard. Most just fried it fast and ate it hot. Cheap, shelf-stable, and ready in minutes, Spam carried countless families through the leanest years, and for many seniors, it still tastes like getting by. Number 12, tomato gravy and biscuits. Down south, when there was no meat for gravy, Grandma made it from a can of tomatoes. She stirred flour into a little hot grease until it browned, poured in canned tomatoes and a splash of water, and let it bubble into a thick, tangy red gravy seasoned with plenty of black pepper. Ladled over split-hot biscuits, it made a supper that cost almost nothing and filled every belly at the table. A can of tomatoes ran a dime, and the biscuits were flour and lard. The gravy went sweet tart and rich as it simmered, clinging to the biscuits in savory red pools. It was breakfast, dinner, or whatever meal the family needed it to be. Tomato gravy over biscuits was pure country resourcefulness, turning a single can into a hot, hearty meal when the smokehouse was bare. Number 11, tuna noodle skillet. Before it became a holiday casserole, tuna and noodles was a weeknight lifesaver. Grandma boiled a pot of egg noodles, stirred in a can of tuna and a can of cream soup or a quick white sauce made from flour and milk, and dropped in a handful of peas or whatever the pantry offered. In 15 minutes, a couple of cheap cans and a bag of noodles fed the whole family a hot, creamy supper. The The tuna gave it protein, the noodles gave it heft, and the sauce tied it all together into something warm and satisfying. Some sprinkled crushed crackers or chips on top for crunch. It needed no oven and no special skill, just a skillet and a few staples that kept for months in the cupboard. Fast, filling, and endlessly forgiving, tuna and noodles fed working families for a fraction of the cost of meat. Number 10. American goulash. Nothing stretched a half-pound of ground beef further than a pot of goulash. Grandma browned the meat with an onion, poured in a can of tomatoes, and stirred in a pot of boiled elbow macaroni until the whole thing came together thick and rich. A little meat, a little pasta, and a can of tomatoes fed a big family with plenty left for tomorrow. The macaroni soaked up the tomato and the beef flavor, so even the cheapest cut of meat tasted like it went all the way to the bottom of the pot. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and maybe a shake of paprika, it warmed the kitchen and the family both. Every household made it a little differently, and every child had their own memory of the smell. Cheap, quick, and deeply filling, goulash was the ultimate hard times one-pot supper. Number 9. The poor man's meal. This one had a name that told you everything. The poor man's meal. Grandma cubed a few potatoes and fried them in a skillet until they turned golden and crisp, then sliced in a hot dog or two and let it all brown together. A couple of potatoes and one frankfurter fed the whole family for pocket change. The potatoes did the filling. The hot dog gave just enough meat to make it feel like a real supper. It sizzled and crackled in the pan, sending up a smell that made empty stomachs growl. Some splashed on ketchup or a little hot sauce. Most ate it straight from the skillet. It was so cheap and so fast that families kept making it long after the hard times passed. The poor man's meal proved that dignity and dinner could both come from a single frying pan. Number 8. Hobo stew. Born in the railroad camps and Hoovervilles of the Depression, hobo stew was survival stripped to its essence. Whatever you had, all in one pot. Grandma tossed in a bit of ground meat if there was any, a can of tomatoes, an onion, a potato, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then let it simmer into a thick, savory stew. Nothing was measured, and nothing was wasted. Families down on their luck pooled scraps to fill the pot, and it always came out warm and filling. The beauty of hobo stew was that it never came out the same way twice. It was a meal built entirely from what was left. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and hope, it fed the hungry through the worst of times. For those who lived it, that simmering pot was the taste of a community that refused to go under. Number 7. Vegetable scrap soup. In a frugal kitchen, nothing went in the trash if it could go in the pot. Grandma saved carrot peels, celery ends, onion skins, potato bits, and the bone from Sunday's dinner, and simmered them together with water and salt into a rich, nourishing soup. What would have been garbage in another house became supper in hers. A handful of scraps and a little time turned into a pot that fed the whole family warm and free. She'd stretch it with a fistful of rice, barley, or noodles to make it stick to the ribs. The kitchen filled with a savory steam that made the leanest week feel manageable. Vegetable scrap soup was resourcefulness at its purest, proof that a careful cook could conjure a meal from the very things most people threw away, and that hunger could always be held off with a little ingenuity. Number 6. Fried potatoes and onions. If there was one supper that defined the frugal American kitchen, it was a skillet of fried potatoes and onions. Grandma sliced up whatever potatoes were in the bin, threw in an onion, and fried them slow in a little grease until they were crisp and brown at the edges and tender in the middle. Potatoes cost pennies a pound and kept for months in a cool cellar, so they were always there when nothing else was. The onions turned sweet and golden, seasoning the whole pan. Salted, heavy, and served hot, It could be a side, a supper, or breakfast the next morning. Some added an egg or a bit of leftover meat to dress it up. Cheap, filling, and endlessly satisfying, fried potatoes and onions carried countless families through the lean years on little more than a sack of spuds. Number 5. Soup beans and cornbread. Nothing kept a poor family alive like a pot of beans. Grandma set dried pinto beans to simmer in the morning with a scrap of fatback or a ham bone, and by supper the kitchen was warm with their earthy smell. Served in a bowl with a wedge of cornbread crumbled right in, soup beans fed a whole family for mere cents a serving. A bag of dried beans cost almost nothing and could carry a household through the leanest stretch of the month. The beans went creamy and rich, the pot liquor thick enough to soak the cornbread through. In the coal towns and farm country, this was the meal that kept whole communities on their feet through hard winters. Filling, nourishing, and cheaper than almost anything else on the table, soup beans and cornbread was frugal cooking at its most sacred. Number 4. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Few suppers say hard times. Comfort like a grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup. Grandma buttered 2 slices of bread, laid a single slice of cheese between them, and pressed the sandwich in a hot skillet until it turned golden and crisp and the cheese melted through. Alongside it went a steaming bowl of tomato soup for dipping. A nickel's worth of bread, cheese, and canned tomatoes made a hot supper in under 10 minutes. The crunch of the buttery bread against the warm, tangy soup was pure comfort on a cold evening. It cost almost nothing, yet felt like a treat, which is exactly why it never left the American table. From Depression kitchens to lunch counters, grilled cheese and tomato soup fed generations cheaply and well, and it still tastes like childhood to every senior who grew up dunking one into the other. Number 3. Pancakes for supper. When the cupboard was down to flour, a little milk, and an egg, Grandma flipped the whole day upside down and made pancakes for supper. A cheap batter of flour, baking powder, milk, and 1 egg poured onto a hot griddle became a stack of warm, filling flapjacks in minutes. Drowned in syrup, molasses, or a sprinkle of sugar, they turned a nearly empty pantry into a supper that felt like a treat. The ingredients cost almost nothing and were always on hand, and the smell of pancakes on the griddle made the leanest night feel generous. Children never once complained about breakfast for dinner. They cheered. It was fast, it was cheap, and it filled every belly at the table with something sweet. For countless families, pancakes for supper turned scarcity into a small celebration, one warm stack at a time. Number 2. Biscuits and sawmill gravy. When the meat was gone but the family still had to be fed, Grandma made gravy out of almost nothing at all. She stirred flour into a spoonful of hot grease until it browned, poured in milk, and cracked black pepper over the top until it thickened into a rich, creamy gravy. Ladled thick over split-hot biscuits, it made a supper that filled every belly for pennies. Flour, grease, and milk were the cheapest things in the kitchen, yet together they became one of the most beloved meals in American history. The gravy went silky and peppery, soaking into the tender biscuits until the plate was one warm, comforting mass. It got its name from the lumber camps, where it fed hungry workers cheaply and well. Biscuits and sawmill gravy was hard times cooking, perfected, simple, filling, and good enough that families kept making it forever. Number 1. Creamed chipped beef on toast. And crowning our list is the supper generations of Americans knew by a nickname too salty to say at the dinner table, SOS. Grandma stirred flour into melted butter, poured in milk, and whisked it into a smooth white sauce, then dropped in torn pieces of cheap dried beef and plenty of black pepper. Ladled over toast, It made a hot, hearty, protein-rich supper in under 15 minutes for just pocket change. A small package of dried beef stretched to feed the whole family, and the creamy gravy did the rest. It fed soldiers by the millions and families by the millions more, from depression kitchens through wartime and beyond. Cheap, fast, and genuinely filling, it stuck to your ribs on the coldest night. To this day, grown men and women ask for it by that old salty name, because nothing else tastes quite so much like getting through hard times together. These 25 suppers were never about food alone. They were about making a nickel do the work of $1, feeding a family on grit and imagination, and refusing to let anyone go to bed hungry. If your grandmother made one of these, drop its number in the comments and tell us the one we missed. Because these meals weren't just survival, they were love, served hot on a hard day.